Lonely Millionaire spent Christmas alone until a poor girl asked him to pretend to be her husband. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. High above New York City, where winter lights shimmered across endless streets and church bells echoed softly through the cold night air, Daniel Whitmore stood alone in a penthouse that seemed far too large for one man. The towering Christmas tree near the glass wall glowed with golden lights and delicate ornaments imported from Europe, yet the room felt strangely empty. Outside, snow drifted slowly across the skyline, while distant laughter rose from the streets below, where families gathered for warm dinners and joyful celebrations. Inside the penthouse, there was only silence. Daniel Whitmore was known across the country as a brilliant technology entrepreneur, a man whose company had transformed the digital world and made him one of the wealthiest figures in modern business. His face appeared on magazine covers. His speeches filled conference halls. Investors called him a genius. Yet on this quiet Christmas evening, none of those things mattered. Wealth could purchase buildings, cars, and entire companies, but it could not purchase warmth, and it certainly could not purchase companionship. Daniel poured himself a glass of red wine and stared across the empty dining table prepared earlier by his staff. The table could seat a large family comfortably, yet only one place setting waited beneath the soft glow of candlelight. He had dismissed the staff hours earlier, telling them to spend Christmas with their loved ones. He had meant it sincerely. After all, someone should enjoy the holiday. He lifted the glass slowly and looked at the reflection of the Christmas tree in the dark window. For a brief moment the lights flickered across his tired expression, revealing a loneliness that no newspaper had ever captured. Christmas used to mean something different long ago. There had once been laughter, music, and promises whispered beside a tree much smaller than the one glowing behind him now. But life had a cruel way of changing people. Betrayal had a way of freezing the heart, and Daniel Whitmore had spent years building walls higher than the skyline itself. He took a slow sip of wine and murmured quietly to the silent room that surrounded him. Another Christmas alone. Far below the glittering towers of Manhattan, on a quiet street where the snow gathered along worn sidewalks and the lights from small diners painted warm colors across the winter air, a young woman stepped out of a narrow restaurant carrying nothing but a thin coat and a tired expression. Her name was Lily Carter, and although she did not know it yet, her desperate decision on this cold Christmas night was about to collide with the life of the loneliest millionaire in New York City. Lily Carter pulled the thin collar of her coat tighter around her neck as the cold wind swept along the narrow Manhattan street. The small diner behind her glowed faintly through fogged windows, but the warmth inside was already fading. A handwritten sign had just been taped to the door that read, "Closed for Christmas." Inside, the manager had counted the last registered drawer of the night while shaking his head with tired frustration. Business had been slow all winter, and even slower on Christmas Eve. Lily had hoped to work the entire evening, collecting tips from travelers and late shoppers. But instead she found herself standing outside with empty hands and a paycheck that barely covered next week of groceries. She took a slow breath, watching white clouds of air disappear into the freezing night. Across the street a group of friends laughed as they hurried toward a taxi, their arms full of wrapped presents and bright shopping bags. Christmas lights blinked above the storefronts, casting warm colors across the falling snow. For most people in the city this night meant comfort, family dinners, and warm kitchens filled with the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon pie. For Lily Carter it meant uncertainty. Her phone vibrated softly in the pocket of her coat. She already knew who it was before she even looked. The name on the screen read Mom. Lily hesitated for a moment, then answered. Her mother's voice came through the speaker full of gentle excitement and holiday cheer. "Lily, honey, we are setting the table now. Your father just finished carving the turkey, and your aunt is already asking about you. Are you still coming tonight?" Lily closed her eyes for a second as the cold wind brushed her cheeks. "Yes, Mom," she said softly. "I will be there soon." Her mother laughed warmly. "Good, because everyone is excited to finally meet him." Lily felt her heart sink deep in her chest. Meet him. The lie she told 3 months earlier had grown far larger than she ever expected. During a phone call back in autumn, she had casually mentioned that she was seeing someone. Her parents had sounded so happy that she had not corrected them. One small lie turned into another, and soon the story became something impossible to undo. In her family's mind, Lily Carter was no longer single. She was happily married. Her mother spoke again, with joyful curiosity. "Your father even bought an extra chair for the table tonight. We cannot wait to meet your husband." Lily swallowed quietly and forced a small smile that no one could see. "He is looking forward to it too, Mom," she replied. "We will be there soon." She ended the call and stared down at the glowing screen in her hand. Husband. The word echoed in her thoughts like an impossible promise. She did not have a husband. She barely had enough money to keep the tiny room she rented in a shared apartment downtown. For a moment she considered telling the truth and ending the lie once and for all. But she imagined the disappointment in her parents' voices and the long silence that would follow. They had already set the table. They had already prepared an extra seat. Snow continued to fall as Lily began walking down the street without any clear direction. She passed decorated shop windows and cheerful crowds heading toward family gatherings. With each step her anxiety grew heavier. Somewhere across the city, a church bell rang softly in the distance, announcing the late evening hour of Christmas Eve. Lily stopped beneath a glowing street lamp and wrapped her arms around herself. There had to be some way to fix this. Somewhere in the enormous city filled with millions of people, there had to be one solution to a desperate lie. At that exact moment, high above the city skyline, Daniel Whitmore set his empty wine glass down on the silent table in his penthouse, unaware that the next decision made by a struggling young woman walking through the snow was about to change both of their lives forever. Lily Carter remained beneath the soft glow of the street lamp as snow gathered quietly along the shoulders of her coat. The city around her moved with the familiar rhythm of Christmas Eve. Taxis rolled slowly through the wet streets, their headlights cutting bright paths through the falling snow. Storefronts shimmered with decorations, and distant music drifted through the air from a nearby bar where a small band played a cheerful holiday song. Yet Lily felt completely alone in the middle of it all. Her mind repeated the same thought again and again. The extra chair at the table. Her father carving the turkey. Her mother smiling proudly while introducing her daughter and the husband everyone believed existed. She began walking again, her boots crunching softly against the thin layer of snow gathering along the sidewalk. Each step carried her farther from the small diner where her shift had ended and closer to a problem that felt impossible to solve. A gust of wind swept down the avenue, and Lily pulled her coat tighter. She glanced through the window of a nearby shop where families were purchasing last-minute gifts. A young couple stood near the counter laughing together while choosing a scarf. The sight made her chest tighten slightly. For a moment, Lily imagined what it would feel like to actually have someone standing beside her tonight. Someone who would walk through the snow with her and share the awkward introductions at the family dinner table. But imagination was not reality. Her phone buzzed again inside her pocket. She did not need to answer this time. She knew her mother was probably calling relatives to tell them that Lily and her husband were on the way. Lily exhaled slowly and continued walking. Without thinking, she turned down a quieter street where the tall buildings grew more expensive and the storefronts disappeared. The sidewalks became cleaner here, the street lights brighter, the buildings taller and more polished. This part of Manhattan belonged to people who lived very different lives than she did. Lily noticed a large luxury hotel rising on the corner ahead, its entrance glowing warmly with gold-colored lights and polished glass doors. Several well-dressed guests moved in and out of the lobby while a doorman greeted them with cheerful holiday wishes. Lily hesitated for a moment at the edge of the sidewalk. She did not belong in places like that. Yet the cold wind pushed against her again, and the warmth visible through the glass doors felt impossible to ignore. Just for a minute, she told herself. Just long enough to warm up. Lily stepped toward the entrance and slipped quietly inside the hotel lobby. The warmth wrapped around her immediately. A large Christmas tree stood in the center of the room, reaching nearly to the ceiling, decorated with hundreds of small golden lights and elegant ornaments. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers while guests relaxed in comfortable chairs beside a marble fireplace. Lily felt slightly out of place among the expensive coats and polished shoes surrounding her, but no one seemed to notice the tired young woman quietly standing near the wall. She walked slowly toward a seating area near the window and sat down, letting the warmth finally reach her frozen hands. Through the tall glass, she could still see the snow falling outside across the glowing city. Her thoughts returned once again to the empty chair waiting at her family dinner table. Somewhere in this massive city, there had to be a way out of the lie she had created. She leaned back in the chair and rubbed her hands together slowly. At that exact moment, the elevator doors across the lobby opened with a quiet sound, and a tall man stepped out into the warm golden light of the hotel lobby. Daniel Whitmore had decided he could not stand another minute alone in the silent penthouse above the city. Wearing a dark coat and a tired expression, he crossed the polished floor of the lobby without noticing the young woman sitting near the window. Lily Carter, however, looked up at the exact moment he passed by, and something about the quiet loneliness in his expression stopped her thoughts completely. For the first time that evening, an impossible idea began forming in her mind, a desperate solution that sounded ridiculous even before it fully existed. She watched the stranger walk toward the exit doors of the hotel, and before her fear could stop her, Lily Carter stood up and hurried after him into the falling snow. Snow drifted through the golden lights outside the hotel entrance as Lily Carter hurried across the sidewalk after the tall stranger. The cold wind rushed past her as the glass doors closed behind her, sealing the warmth of the lobby away. For a moment she nearly stopped herself. The idea in her mind sounded ridiculous, reckless, and completely impossible. Yet the thought of the empty chair at her family table pushed her forward again. The man had already reached the edge of the sidewalk, preparing to step into the quiet street where the snow softened the noise of the city. Lily gathered her courage and called out before fear could silence her. "Excuse me." The man paused and turned slowly. His expression carried a calm seriousness that made Lily hesitate for half a second. Daniel Whitmore studied the young woman standing a few steps away from him. Her coat was thin, her hair dusted with snowflakes, and her eyes held a mixture of nervous determination and exhaustion. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected softly in the snow between them. "Yes," Daniel finally said quietly. Lily opened her mouth, then closed it again as doubt rushed through her thoughts. This was a stranger. She did not know his name, his story, or even why he looked so lonely when he walked through the hotel lobby. Yet something about the quiet sadness in his expression had made her believe that he might understand desperation. She took a breath and forced the words out before courage disappeared completely. "This is going to sound strange," she said quickly. "Actually, it is going to sound very strange." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. Lily continued, speaking faster now as the cold wind pushed against them. "I promise I am not crazy. I just need help for one evening." Daniel watched her carefully. "What kind of help?" Lily hesitated again, realizing how unbelievable the next sentence would sound. But she had already come this far. "My family is expecting me tonight for Christmas dinner," she explained. "They think I am married." Daniel blinked once in quiet surprise, but allowed her to continue. Lily rushed forward with the rest of the story before embarrassment could stop her. "Months ago, I told them I met someone. It started as a small lie because they were worried about me being alone in the city. But the lie kept growing, and now they believe I have a husband, and tonight they are waiting to meet him." She looked down at the snowy sidewalk and then back up at the stranger in front of her. Daniel remained silent, but his expression had softened slightly with curiosity. Lily swallowed and forced herself to say the final part. "So I was wondering if you could pretend to be my husband. Just for Christmas dinner." Daniel Whitmore stood perfectly still as the request settled in the quiet air between them. Snow continued falling gently across the street lights while the distant sound of car horns echoed from nearby avenues. For a moment, he almost laughed at the absurdity of it. In a city filled with millions of people, a stranger had just walked up to him and asked him to pretend to be her husband. Yet something about the honesty in her voice stopped him from dismissing the idea immediately. He studied her again more carefully this time. Her eyes were not manipulative. They were frightened and hopeful at the same time. Desperate eyes. Daniel folded his hands in the pockets of his coat and asked calmly, "Why would you ask a complete stranger?" Lily answered without hesitation, "Because you looked lonely." The words hung quietly in the cold air. Daniel Whitmore had built an empire by reading people in boardrooms and negotiations, yet no one had ever spoken to him that directly before. For a moment the snow seemed to fall slower around them as he considered her strange request. Then Lily added one final sentence with quiet sincerity. I promise it will only be one evening. After tonight, you will never see me again. Daniel Whitmore looked up at the dark sky for a second, then back at the young woman standing in the snow. The silent penthouse waiting for him suddenly felt colder than the winter night. He exhaled slowly and said something he never expected to say to a stranger on a New York sidewalk. All right, I will pretend to be your husband. Daniel Whitmore's answer seemed to hang in the cold winter air as Lily Carter stared at him in disbelief. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had imagined the words. Snow continued drifting down quietly around them, while the distant glow of the hotel entrance illuminated the sidewalk. You will pretend to be my husband, she repeated softly, as if confirming the reality of what had just happened. Daniel gave a small nod. Just for tonight, he said calmly. Lily released a breath she had not realized she had been holding. Relief washed over her so quickly that she almost laughed, though the situation still felt completely unreal. Thank you, she said quickly. I know this is strange and I promise I will explain everything to my parents after tonight. They just need to see that I am not alone in this city. Daniel studied her expression for a moment. Her gratitude was sincere and unguarded. He had spent years around people who calculated every word they spoke, people who measured relationships by financial advantage or social status. Lily Carter did not seem like that kind of person. She simply looked like someone trying to keep her family from worrying about her. Daniel glanced down the quiet street and asked the obvious question. Where exactly is this Christmas dinner? Lily pointed down the avenue toward the subway entrance glowing beneath a street light. My parents live in Queens, she explained. It is about 40 minutes by train if we hurry. Daniel looked at the subway entrance and then back at Lily. For a moment she assumed he would change his mind. Instead, he said something that surprised her again. We will not take the train. Lily frowned slightly. What do you mean? Daniel turned toward the hotel driveway where a black luxury car waited beneath the falling snow. The driver had been standing beside the vehicle for nearly 10 minutes, expecting his employer to return upstairs to the penthouse at any moment. Instead, he now watched with mild confusion as Daniel approached with a young woman he had never seen before. Lily followed a few steps behind, suddenly aware that the stranger she had recruited for her desperate plan might not be as ordinary as she originally assumed. The driver quickly opened the back door of the car. Good evening, sir, he said respectfully. Daniel nodded once. Good evening, Marcus. Change of plans. We are heading to Queens tonight. Lily stopped walking. Queens, she repeated in disbelief. Daniel looked at her with a faint hint of amusement in his expression. I believe that is where your parents live. Lily glanced at the polished black car and then back at Daniel. You have a driver, she said carefully. Daniel paused for a second before answering. Yes, he said simply. It makes traveling easier. Lily slowly stepped toward the car, trying to process how a random stranger standing outside a hotel lobby suddenly had access to a luxury vehicle with a private driver. She climbed into the back seat beside Daniel as the door closed softly behind them. The warmth inside the car felt almost unreal after the freezing sidewalk. Marcus moved around to the driver's seat and started the engine while holiday music played quietly through the radio speakers. Lily folded her hands nervously in her lap. I guess we should decide what your name is, she said after a moment. Daniel turned his head slightly toward her. My name is Daniel, he replied. Lily blinked in surprise. You are going to use your real name, she asked. Daniel considered the question. Yes, he answered calmly. It is easier to remember the truth. Lily nodded slowly. Daniel, she repeated as if practicing the sound of it. My parents are Robert and Margaret Carter, she explained. They are kind people, but they ask many questions. Daniel looked out the window as the car pulled away from the hotel and into the snowy Manhattan streets. I have attended many board meetings and investor negotiations, he said quietly. I think I can survive one Christmas dinner. Lily smiled for the first time since the strange night began. She leaned back against the seat as the bright city lights moved past the window. Somewhere deep inside, she still felt nervous about the plan they had just created together. But for the first time, that evening the empty chair at her family dinner table would not remain empty. The black car moved smoothly through the snowy streets of Manhattan as bright holiday lights reflected across the windows. Lily Carter sat quietly in the back seat beside Daniel Whitmore, watching the city slide past while trying to steady the nervous thoughts racing through her mind. The crowded sidewalks filled with holiday shoppers and families hurrying home through the falling snow. The radio played soft Christmas music while the driver guided the car toward the bridge leading out of Manhattan. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lily cleared her throat gently. "We should probably practice a little before we get there," she said carefully. Daniel turned his attention toward her. "Practice?" he asked. Lily nodded. "My parents are very observant," she explained. "If we hesitate when they ask questions, they will immediately know something is wrong." Daniel gave a small, thoughtful nod. "That seems reasonable," he said. Lily took a breath and began explaining the details of the story they would need to tell. "My parents think we met about a year ago," she said. "I told them you work in finance, because that sounded believable and boring enough that they would not ask too many questions." Daniel allowed a faint smile to appear. "Finance," he repeated quietly. "That is close enough to the truth." Lily tilted her head slightly. "What do you actually do?" she asked. Daniel paused for a moment before answering. "I run a technology company," he said calmly. Lily raised her eyebrows slightly, but did not push further. "That explains the driver," she said with a soft laugh. Daniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at his hands for a moment, as if considering how much he wanted to reveal. "It is not important tonight," he finally said. "Tonight, I am simply your husband." Lily nodded slowly. "That works for me," she said. She shifted slightly in her seat and continued preparing him for the evening ahead. "My father will probably ask where you grew up," she explained. "Just say somewhere outside the city. He likes hearing stories about small towns. My mother will ask how we met, so we should keep that simple." Daniel listened carefully. "Where did we meet?" he asked. Lily thought for a moment. "At a bookstore," she said finally. "That sounds romantic enough without raising too many questions." Daniel gave another small nod. "A bookstore it is." The car crossed the bridge as Manhattan slowly faded behind them, and the quieter streets of Queens began appearing ahead. The tall skyscrapers were replaced by rows of brick houses decorated with colorful Christmas lights. Lily felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety growing in her chest. She turned toward Daniel again. "One more thing," she added gently. "My family is very affectionate. They hug everyone when they arrive." Daniel looked mildly surprised by that information. "I see," he said calmly. Lily laughed softly. "I hope you are prepared for that." Daniel leaned back slightly and looked out at the glowing neighborhood streets. "I agreed to play the role," he said. "I should play it properly." Lily studied his face for a moment. Beneath the calm confidence, she could still see the quiet loneliness she had noticed earlier outside the hotel. Something about that expression made her voice soften slightly. Into the falling snow. The cold air brushed his face as he walked around the car and offered his hand to Lily. Turkey and fresh bread filled the air. Christmas music played softly from a radio in the corner, while colorful lights twinkled along the walls. The dining table stood prepared in the center of the room with plates carefully arranged and one empty chair waiting at the end. Lily glanced at Daniel briefly and smiled with quiet relief. For the first time all night, the chair was no longer empty. Warm air filled the small Carter home as Daniel Whitmore stepped fully inside, bringing with him the faint scent of snow and winter night. The contrast between the quiet penthouse he had left behind and this lively home felt almost overwhelming. The living room glowed with soft Christmas lights wrapped around a modest tree in the corner. Handmade ornaments hung from the branches, some shaped like little stars cut from paper and others painted carefully by hand. A small train set circled the base of the tree while holiday music played gently from a radio on the kitchen counter. Lily Carter slipped off her coat and hung it near the door before turning back toward Daniel with a reassuring smile. "You survived the porch greeting," she whispered quietly. Daniel allowed a small, amused smile. "I believe the evening has only begun," he replied. Margaret Carter was already moving around the kitchen with cheerful energy. "Sit down, both of you," she insisted warmly. "Dinner is ready, and your father has been pretending not to stare at the oven for the past half hour." Robert Carter laughed from the other side of the room as he carried a large tray toward the table. "A man has responsibilities on Christmas Eve," he said proudly, "especially when his daughter finally brings her husband home for the holidays." Lily felt a quick flash of nervousness, but kept her smile steady. Daniel followed her to the table, where the empty chair that once caused her so much worry now waited beside her own seat. Margaret placed a dish of roasted turkey in the center of the table along with bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans, and warm bread. The comforting smell of the meal filled the room completely. Daniel noticed something he had not seen in a long time. Every plate at the table was slightly different, as if collected over many years. The silverware did not perfectly match either. Yet the warmth in the room made those details feel completely unimportant. Robert poured glasses of cider while watching Daniel with friendly curiosity. "So Daniel," he said casually, "where did you say you grew up?" Lily felt her heart skip for a moment as she remembered the story they had practiced in the car. Daniel answered calmly, without hesitation. "I grew up in a small town outside the city," he said. "It was quiet, but it taught me the value of hard work." Robert nodded approvingly. "That is the best kind of place to grow up," he said. Margaret placed her hand gently on Lily's shoulder before sitting down. "Tell us how you two met," she asked with bright interest. Lily glanced quickly at Daniel before answering. "We met in a bookstore," she said. "I was trying to reach a book on a high shelf, and Daniel helped me get it down." Daniel continued the story smoothly. "After that we started talking, and somehow ended up sharing coffee for 2 hours. Margaret laughed softly. "A bookstore and coffee," she said happily. "That sounds like the beginning of a beautiful story." The conversation flowed easily after that. Robert asked Daniel about his work while Margaret filled everyone's plates with generous portions of food. Lily listened with growing amazement as Daniel answered each question with calm confidence. He spoke simply about his work in technology without mentioning anything about the massive company he actually owned. At one point, Robert raised his glass slightly. "I am glad Lily found someone who treats her well," he said sincerely. "She has always worked too hard." Daniel looked at Lily for a brief moment before responding. "She deserves someone who cares about her happiness," he said quietly. Lily felt warmth spread through her chest at the sincerity in his voice. Later in the evening, Margaret disappeared into the kitchen for a moment before returning with a small wrapped package. She handed it to Daniel with a gentle smile. "We did not know what you liked," she explained softly, "but we wanted you to have something to remember your first Christmas with us." Daniel slowly opened the simple paper wrapping and found a knitted scarf folded neatly inside. The yarn was soft and deep red, clearly handmade with care. Margaret spoke again with quiet kindness. "No one should spend Christmas feeling alone," she said. Daniel looked down at the scarf for a long moment, as the warmth of the room settled around him. In that small house filled with laughter and kindness, the loneliest millionaire in New York suddenly realized that the greatest gift he had received that night was not the scarf in his hands, but the feeling that for the first time in years he was no longer sitting alone at a Christmas table. The warmth of the Carter home continued long after dinner plates were cleared from the table. Margaret insisted that everyone remain seated while she brought out dessert, and within minutes the small dining room filled with the sweet smell of apple pie and cinnamon. Daniel Whitmore sat quietly in his chair, observing the scene around him with an unfamiliar sense of comfort. Robert poured fresh cider while Margaret cut generous slices of pie, and Lily moved around the kitchen helping her mother carry plates back to the table. The entire moment felt simple, almost ordinary, yet Daniel realized that he had not experienced a night like this in many years. In his world, dinners usually took place in quiet private restaurants or formal boardrooms where every conversation carried a purpose and every smile hid a negotiation. Here there were no hidden motives. Only warmth. Only family. Robert leaned back in his chair and laughed as he told an old story about Lily's childhood, describing how she once tried to rescue a stray dog during a snowstorm when she was very young. Lily covered her face with her hands in embarrassment while Margaret smiled proudly. Daniel listened with quiet amusement, realizing that this young woman sitting beside him had grown up in a world very different from his own. The evening passed quickly as stories and laughter filled the small house. Outside, the snow continued falling softly across the quiet neighborhood streets. For the first time in years, Daniel forgot about the empty penthouse waiting for him across the river. He forgot about the endless meetings and financial reports that normally filled his thoughts. Tonight, he was simply Daniel, a guest at a Christmas table surrounded by kindness. Eventually, Margaret stood and began clearing the final plates while Lily offered to help her in the kitchen. Daniel remained at the table with Robert, who poured one final glass of cider for each of them. The older man studied Daniel thoughtfully before speaking. "You know, son," he said in a calm voice, "Lily has always been independent. She works harder than anyone I know. For a long time her mother and I worried that the city might make her lonely." Daniel listened carefully. Robert continued with a quiet smile. "Seeing her tonight with someone who treats her with respect means a great deal to us." Daniel felt a strange weight settle in his chest as he answered honestly. "She deserves that," he said softly. Robert nodded approvingly and lifted his glass. "I am glad she found you," he said. At that exact moment, the peaceful mood of the evening changed. A sharp knock suddenly echoed against the front door. The unexpected sound startled everyone in the house. Margaret paused in the kitchen doorway, while Lily looked toward the entrance with confusion. Who could that be this late on Christmas Eve, she wondered aloud. Robert stood from his chair and walked toward the door. Snow blew gently through the porch light as he opened it. Standing outside in a long, elegant coat was a tall woman with dark hair and a confident expression. Her eyes moved immediately past Robert and focused on Daniel sitting at the table. "Daniel Whitmore," she said clearly as she stepped inside the doorway. "I had a feeling I might find you here." The room fell silent. Lily looked from the stranger to Daniel with growing confusion. Daniel slowly stood from his chair as recognition crossed his face. The woman removed her gloves and glanced around the modest house with a faint smile that did not reach her eyes. "It seems you have chosen a very unusual place to spend Christmas," she continued calmly. Lily finally spoke with uncertainty. "Daniel, who is this?" she asked. The woman answered before he could respond. "My name is Victoria Hale," she said coolly, "and I am very familiar with the man you believe is your husband. Because the Daniel Whitmore sitting at your Christmas table is not just a man who works in technology. He is one of the wealthiest men in New York City." The silence inside the Carter home grew heavy as Victoria Hale words settled into the room like a sudden winter storm. Lily Carter remained standing beside the table, her eyes moving slowly between the elegant stranger in the doorway and the man she had invited into her life only hours earlier. Daniel Whitmore did not immediately speak. His calm expression had changed into something more serious. And for the first time, that evening the quiet confidence he carried seemed to reveal the powerful world he truly belonged to. Robert Carter looked at Victoria with confusion. "I believe you might have the wrong house," he said carefully. Victoria stepped farther inside without asking permission, brushing a few snowflakes from her coat. "Oh, I assure you I have the correct house," she replied coolly. Her eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "You always did enjoy surprising people, Daniel." Margaret Carter stood beside the kitchen doorway with a worried expression. Lily glanced toward Daniel again, her voice softer now but filled with uncertainty. "Daniel, what is she talking about?" Daniel took a slow breath before answering. "Victoria has a habit of exaggerating situations," he said calmly. Victoria laughed lightly, though there was no warmth in the sound. "Exaggerating," she repeated. "Then perhaps you should explain to this lovely family why your name appears on the front page of business magazines every month." Lily felt her stomach tighten. She turned back toward Daniel, searching his face for an explanation. Daniel remained still for a moment before finally speaking with quiet honesty. "Victoria is not wrong," he admitted. "I do own a technology company in New York City." Victoria folded her arms with satisfaction. "That is one way of describing it," she said. "Another way would be that Daniel Whitmore built one of the most valuable technology companies in the country and became a billionaire before the age of 40. Robert blinked in surprise while Margaret slowly sat down in the nearest chair. Lily felt as if the air had suddenly disappeared from the room. She had suspected that Daniel might have been successful or wealthy, but the truth being spoken aloud so bluntly felt overwhelming. She looked at him with disbelief. "Why did you not tell me?" she asked quietly. Daniel answered honestly. "Because tonight was not supposed to be about money," he said. Victoria shook her head with amusement. "Always the humble hero," she said sarcastically. Lily crossed her arms slightly, her voice growing firmer. "Did you follow him here?" she asked Victoria. Victoria gave a faint smile. "Not exactly," she replied. Daniel's assistant mentioned that he had left his penthouse unexpectedly tonight, and the driver vehicle was easy enough to track. I was curious where he might be. Spending Christmas Eve. Her gaze moved slowly around the modest home before returning to Daniel. "I certainly did not expect this charming little dinner party." Daniel's voice lowered slightly. "That was unnecessary, Victoria." Victoria ignored him and addressed Lily instead. "I assume he told you he works in technology," she said. "That is technically true. What he probably did not mention is that people around the world watch his every business decision. Investors treat him like a king." Lily looked down at the floor as the reality of the situation settled in her mind. The man sitting beside her at dinner had entered her life as a stranger willing to help with a desperate lie. Now she realized that he lived in a world far beyond anything she had imagined. Robert cleared his throat and spoke carefully. "Wealth does not change how a person behaves at our table," he said calmly. "Daniel has been respectful and kind since he walked through our door. Victoria tilted her head slightly with curiosity. That may be true, she admitted. But kindness can be a very convincing disguise. Lily looked at Daniel again, her eyes filled with questions. Daniel finally stepped forward and spoke with quiet sincerity. I did not lie about who I was as a person, he said. I simply did not tell the entire story. Lily's voice trembled slightly. So tonight was just a performance, she asked softly. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, he replied. Tonight was the first time in years that I felt like a normal man sitting at a family dinner table. And for that I owe you more gratitude than you can imagine. The quiet room remained tense after Daniel Whitmore finished speaking. The warmth that had filled the Carter home earlier in the evening seemed to fade beneath the weight of the truth now standing between them. Snow continued drifting softly outside the windows, but inside the house no one moved for several seconds. Lily Carter looked at Daniel with a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and something deeper that she struggled to name. She had invited a stranger into her life for one evening, believing he was simply a lonely man willing to help her solve a small problem. Now she realized that the man sitting at her family table belonged to a completely different world. Victoria Hale stood near the doorway with quiet confidence, watching the tension unfold exactly as she had expected. Robert Carter crossed his arms slowly as he studied the situation with the steady calm of someone who had lived long enough to understand complicated moments. Margaret Carter looked between Lily and Daniel with gentle concern, sensing that the evening had suddenly become far more serious than anyone had planned. Lily finally spoke, her voice quieter than before, but steady. You should have told me, she said. Daniel met her gaze without looking away. You are right, he replied calmly. I should have told you. Victoria gave a soft laugh from across the room. Honesty has never been Daniel's strongest habit, she remarked coolly. Daniel did not respond to her. His attention remained on Lily. I did not hide the truth to manipulate you, he said quietly. I hid it because I wanted one night where my name did not change how people treated me. Lily folded her arms slightly as she tried to process everything she had learned. You could have said something in the car, she replied. Daniel nodded once. I thought about it, he admitted. But the moment we walked into this house, something changed. Lily frowned slightly. What do you mean? Daniel looked around the small dining room where the plates were still on the table and the Christmas lights from the tree reflected softly against the walls. I have spent years attending formal dinners where every guest wanted something from me, he explained. Business deals, investments, influence. Tonight was the first dinner I have had in a long time where no one cared who I was. They only cared that I was sitting at the table. Lily remained silent for a moment. Victoria stepped forward with mild impatience. This emotional speech is very touching, she said sharply. But it does not change the fact that this entire situation began with a lie. Lily turned toward her with a firm expression. The lie started with me, she said clearly. I asked him to pretend to be my husband. Victoria looked slightly surprised by the direct answer, but quickly recovered. That may be true, she admitted. But Daniel has a habit of letting people believe what they want if it benefits him. Daniel's voice remained calm. That is not why I stayed tonight, he said. Lily looked down for a moment before speaking again. Maybe not, she said. Quietly. But you still do not belong in my world. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Lily continued before he could answer. I asked you to help me for one evening, she said. And you did. I am grateful for that. But everything after this moment would only become more complicated. Daniel took a small step closer. Lily, I never intended to hurt you. Lily shook her head gently. You did not hurt me, she said softly. You reminded me that our lives are completely different. Robert Carter watched the conversation carefully, but allowed his daughter to speak for herself. Margaret placed a comforting hand on Lily's shoulder as the young woman took a steady breath. Thank you for helping me tonight, Daniel, Lily said sincerely. But it is time for the performance to end. Daniel stood still as the meaning of her words settled between them. For the first time that evening, he realized that the simple warmth he had experienced at the Carter table might disappear as quickly as it had appeared. Outside, the snow continued falling quietly across the small neighborhood street, while inside the Carter home, Lily Carter stepped back, creating a distance between herself and the loneliest millionaire in New York City. The quiet tension inside the Carter home lingered for several long seconds after Lily Carter stepped back and spoke the words that ended the fragile illusion of the evening. Daniel Whitmore stood motionless near the dining table, the red knitted scarf still resting loosely in his hands. The warm lights of the Christmas tree flickered softly across the room, reflecting in the polished wood of the table where the dinner plates remained half cleared. For the first time that night the house felt small and uncertain. Daniel slowly nodded as he accepted Lily's decision. "You are right," he said quietly. "This began as a favor, and it should end the same way." His voice carried no anger, only a quiet understanding that somehow made the moment even heavier. Victoria Hale watched from the doorway with calm satisfaction, though she said nothing further. Robert Carter stepped forward slightly, his voice steady but respectful. "Daniel, you are welcome in this home, whether you are wealthy or not," he said. "But I understand that my daughter needs time to think." Daniel gave a small nod of gratitude toward the older man. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," he replied. "Margaret." Carter looked at the young man with kind eyes. "Before you leave," she said gently, "please take the scarf. It was meant for you tonight." Daniel looked down at the deep red yarn folded in his hands. He wrapped it slowly around his neck, the soft fabric warming him against the cold air that waited outside. "I will treasure it," he said sincerely. Lily remained quiet as Daniel walked toward the front door. When he reached the doorway, he paused and turned back one last time. For a moment his eyes met Lily again, and although neither of them spoke, there was a silent understanding passing between them. The evening had begun with a lie, but somewhere along the way something genuine had appeared as well. Daniel stepped outside into the falling snow, and the front door closed gently behind him. The driver, Marcus, was already waiting beside the car at the curb. The quiet ride back to Manhattan felt very different from the one earlier that night. The city lights reflected across the window as Daniel leaned back in the seat, replaying every moment of the evening in his mind. The warmth of the Carter home, the laughter around the table, the simple honesty of a family that welcomed him without knowing his name or his fortune. For the first time in many years, Daniel realized that wealth had given him nearly everything except the one thing he truly wanted. Somewhere across the river, Lily Carter stood in the living room of her childhood home while her parents quietly began clearing the table. Margaret placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Lily nodded slowly. "I will be," she replied. "He helped us tonight, and I will always be grateful for that." Robert spoke thoughtfully from the kitchen doorway. "Sometimes people enter our lives for a reason, even if they do not stay forever," he said. The rest of Christmas night passed quietly in the Carter home while the snow continued falling across Queens. Several days later, as the holiday decorations remained glowing across the city, Lily Carter walked down a familiar street in Manhattan looking for work. The small diner where she once worked had not reopened after the holiday break, leaving her once again uncertain about her future. As she turned the corner onto a street she had never visited before, Lily suddenly stopped walking. A newly renovated restaurant stood in front of her with warm lights shining through wide windows. The sign above the entrance displayed a simple name painted in elegant letters. Lily Table. Confused and curious, she stepped closer to the window. Inside she saw a busy dining room filled with people enjoying lunch. At the center of the room stood a tall, familiar figure speaking with the staff. Daniel Whitmore turned toward the entrance just as Lily stepped through the door, and for the first time since Christmas night, their eyes met again. The warm light from the restaurant windows reflected across the winter sidewalk as Lily Carter stepped slowly inside the newly opened dining room. The place was alive with quiet conversation and the comforting sound of dishes being prepared in the kitchen. Wooden tables filled the room, each decorated with simple flowers and soft lighting that created an atmosphere very different from the luxury restaurants scattered across Manhattan. This place felt welcoming, the kind of place where people stayed longer than they planned simply because it felt good to be there. Lily stood near the entrance for a moment, taking in the scene with surprise. On the far side of the room, Daniel Whitmore was speaking calmly with a member of the staff. He wore the same deep red scarf Margaret Carter had given him on Christmas night. When he turned and noticed Lily standing by the door, his expression shifted from professional focus to quiet relief. He excused himself from the staff member and walked across the dining room toward her. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The last time they had seen each other, the evening had ended in uncertainty and distance. Daniel finally broke the silence. "I was hoping you would come by," he said gently. Lily glanced around the restaurant again before meeting his eyes. "You named it Lily Table," she said. Daniel nodded once. It seemed like the right name. Lily folded her arms lightly as she tried to understand. "Why would you do this?" she asked. Daniel looked around the room for a moment before answering. On Christmas night, you showed me something I had been missing for a very long time, he said quietly. I realized that success and money never gave me the feeling I experienced sitting at your family table. Lily listened carefully while he continued. I wanted to create a place where people could experience that same warmth and honesty. A place where strangers could sit down together and feel like they belonged. Lily's voice softened slightly. So you built an entire restaurant because of one dinner, she asked. Daniel smiled gently. That dinner meant more to me than any business deal I have ever made. Lily walked slowly toward one of the empty tables near the window. She ran her fingers lightly across the smooth wooden surface while thinking about everything that had happened since Christmas Eve. Daniel joined her beside the table. I also hoped this place might give you an opportunity, he added. Lily looked at him with confusion. What kind of opportunity, she asked. Daniel placed a small folder on the table and opened it. Inside were documents and a set of keys. I bought this building and renovated the entire space, he explained. But Lily Table needs someone who understands what makes a place like this special. Someone who believes in the kind of family warmth you showed me that night. Lily's eyes widened slightly as she understood his meaning. You want me to run this place? She asked quietly. Daniel nodded. Only if you want to. Lily looked down at the keys resting on the table. For a moment, she felt the same nervous excitement she had felt on the snowy sidewalk outside the hotel weeks earlier. Life was once again offering her something unexpected. She slowly picked up the keys and smiled. I think I would like that, she said softly. Daniel's expression warmed as he watched her. There is one more thing, he added. Lily looked up again. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and carefully placed a small ring box on the table. This time there is no pretending, he said gently. Lily Carter, will you marry me for real? Lily laughed softly through the sudden emotion in her voice. I think we already had our first Christmas dinner as husband and wife, she said. Maybe this time we should make it official. Outside the restaurant, snow began falling again across the busy streets of New York City, while inside Lily Table, the loneliest millionaire and the poor girl who once asked him for a simple favor finally found the life they both had been searching for.